If today were an average day in the UK, 13 men will kill themselves. That's probably 2 people while you're sat here at this TED event. The harsh reality is that modern day man is fundamentally flawed. And there's not one person in this room who isn't directly affected by it. So just imagine for one moment, if we could take what man and masculinity represents in its current format and rebrand it completely. Would we make him think and behave any differently? Would we change anything at all? Well, we need to, because it's all just a little bit outdated, and it's having a huge impact. The current perception of man and masculinity has been developed through sustained periods of hard labour, of conflict and industrialisation. And even modern day capitalism has had an impact by encouraging and fueling our natural competitive tendencies. And so for years, through decades of gender stereotyping, man has learnt to develop a thick skin and build his walls and become stoic man who never breaks down. Now, stoicism is defined as the endurance of pain and hardship, but without the display of feelings or complaint. It's how we've been conditioned for years, and we still live with that same mindset even now. How many times have you heard the phrase, man up? Or the more anatomically targeted version of grow some balls. But just think about the impact that that has on men, on their relationships, on their professional development, on their children, on you. This shallow, emotionally disconnected approach to masculinity is so outdated and out of touch with the demands of modern society, and it affects every single one of us. Up until 2016, I was that guy who had absolutely perfected the art of manning up, because that's what I believed was expected of me. I was working as a TV producer at the time, and so I had all the usual pressures of budgets and deadlines. And I experienced stress on a daily basis. So I developed and perfectly honed the ability to withdraw into myself and to cut myself off as a means of dealing with it. And I completely mastered the art of using silence as a coping mechanism, because I thought that's just the easiest way to deal with stuff. And sometimes I'd be gone for days. Not physically, because I was still there in the room, but emotionally, I was completely detached to what was happening right before my own eyes. And what was happening was that I'd started to fail. I was so focused on being that self-sufficient hero, the provider, the hunter, the protector, the stoic, that I'd lost sight of all the important things in life. I was conforming to expectations. And as a consequence, well, my work suffered, my relationship suffered, and my health suffered. At 3 a.m. one morning, as I laid in my bed, drenched in a cold sweat and physically shivering from the breeze that was coming in through the open window, and my heart rate going through the roof, that I learned my lesson. And I learned that being that self-sufficient hero isn't in the slightest bit heroic at all. On the contrary, stoicism, the stiff upper lip, the 1,000-yard stare, all of those traditional masculine traits that we use to define man, are in fact the fastest route to depression and isolation and loneliness. Newton's third law states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, which suggests that if we refuse to deal with our pain and our hardship head on, it will have an impact. It might not be immediate, but it will happen. And it hit me really hard. So, on that morning in 2016, I slipped into the longest and most crippling period of depression I'd ever experienced. Now, the first time I had depression, I didn't have a clue what was going on. I had no energy, and I was confused, and even the simplest of decisions I couldn't make. And it was as if all of those vibrant sights and sounds and colours and emotions that we experience in a non-depressive state just completely drained away. And at the time, I hid it. Because that's what we do. The second time I had depression, I was lucky because I understood. And I learned to not hide it. You see, traditionally, man has placed rational goals ahead of his own emotional development. We conform to expectations. And so we embrace competition, and we seek out performance and profits and efficiencies and results. And while we're doing that, because of the way that we're conditioned to think, we are less focused on those areas that develop our own emotional intelligence. It's a fundamental flaw of masculinity. And it drives what I call hollow success. Hollow success is a material wealth. And it's really short-lived. And it's meaningless. And hollow success is the perfect contradiction. Because we can all appear successful to the outside world, but how emotionally rich are we really? And hollow success is a false castle that we're all living in. And it's built on really flimsy foundations. And all it takes is a little breeze to come through the window for it all to come falling down. And here's the evidence. The biggest killer of men under the age of 50 isn't cancer, or smoking, or road accidents, or alcohol. It's themselves. Tragically, suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50. And here's something else for you to think about. Why is it that when the gender population split is give or take 50-50 male to female, that 70% of the homeless are men, 96% of the prison population are men, and 76% of all suicides are men? Well, there are several contributing factors, but the biggest killer here, literally, is cognitive conditioning and the way that we are brought up. That's the biggest killer here. Everything from what we think to what we say to what we do to our emotional responses to these are repeating patterns of behavior based upon the way that we've been conditioned. And it stems right back to early childhood. From a very early age, girls are conditioned to be caring and sensitive and emotionally aware. And that grows right through into adulthood. But boys are conditioned down a different route. And you only need to browse a toy store or a bookshelf to see it. And the differences are really stark. From pastel-coloured unicorns and rainbows one moment, to aggressive weaponry and camouflage and masks the next. All in the blink of an eye. And yet, we're all human. We're starting to see a shift now in the way that females are represented, away from the traditional Disney princess to a much stronger, more independent character. And that is brilliant to see. But are we seeing an equivalent shift in the way that men are represented? Absolutely not. Man always has been, and still is, the aggressor, the stoic, the mask wearer. And it's always his problem to solve and his problem alone. For example, when was the last time you saw a guy stop and ask someone for directions? Because I guarantee that if you do see it, he won't be listening to the answers. Because despite having had the balls to ask, he'll still be in his own head trying to find his own solution. So if we apply that back to the statistics, the percentages are as they are because women are conditioned to seek help and support, and men are conditioned not to, because it's still seen as an admission of weakness. Up until that morning in 2016, I was conditioned to think and act and behave in a way that was expected of me. And I continued to do that, even though I knew deep down in my core that what I was doing wasn't right for me. And I continued to do it, right the way through to the moment that I realized it was having a negative impact on my own health. Now, I didn't want to become one of those statistics that I just gave you, so I decided to make some changes. I walked out of what was the best paid job that I ever had without having a thing to go to. And most people put me on a scale, somewhere between boldness and absolute madness. Admittedly, most people slotted me onto the madness end of the scale. But I did 3 things. I reviewed, I retrained, and I rebranded. I worked out what it was that I wanted to be, as opposed to what it was I'd been conditioned to become. And I learned new skills, and I systematically set about making it happen. And so now I don't drive the same route to work every day and sit in the same office with the same people doing the same stuff. Now, I'm a successful film and TV actor, I'm a public speaker, and I'm a coach. So, no matter how far away we are from where we want to be, change is absolutely possible. Firstly, by being aware that we can be different. And secondly, by having the confidence and the courage and the commitment to change. To change our perspectives on man and masculinity, we need to face up to a traditional man. And we need to sit him down and question him. And we need to question his authority, his choices, his decisions, his wisdom, or lack of. And we need to show him a compelling vision for how his future can be, as opposed to basing it on outdated versions of his own past. And he'll argue. And he'll no doubt tell us that we're mad. And he'll absolutely tell us to man up. That's to be expected. But we shouldn't be fearful of that. On the contrary, we should embrace it. Because if we're rebranding what we mean by man and masculinity, surely by definition we're also changing what it means to man up. And that is where we need to start. Because we live in an era of broken families, of absent or surrogate fathers. And where are the decent role models that our children can look up to and respect and admire for all the right reasons? Not because they earn millions from kicking a ball or because they've won some talent show, but because they exhibit the real values of emotional intelligence and self-awareness and compassion. And because they are aware of their own vulnerabilities and they have the courage to deal with them. So, the next time you're told to man up, I'd encourage you really strongly to pause and to really think about your responses to that. Will you fall back into your old conditioned behaviours and do what you've always done? Or will you really man up, stand up, and open up?